birds of prey were attracted to this holy liturgy, to disturb it, to defile it, to destroy it. And Abraham, all he was able to do was to shoo away the vultures and the buzzards that were coming. Then verse 12 said, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. They don't give this narration in terms of modern clinical psychology, but is there anybody who's ever experienced what physicians call an acute anxiety attack? Where this sense of terror descends upon you, making you sick in the pit of your stomach, afraid to take another step. What the saints called the experience of the dark night of the soul. So what the scriptures are describing here in Abraham's life is as the sun goes down and he's left with this scene of carnage around him, he is suddenly overcome and virtually vanquished by terror that descends upon him in his sleep. And while he was asleep, in this terror, God spoke to him, saying, Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But then will I also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. And as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you shall be buried at a good old age. And then in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. Now I have saved the best for last. If I ever am in prison, remember the one book is the Bible. The one book of the Bible is Hebrews. The one chapter of the Bible is Genesis 15. If I'm only allowed one verse, okay? And you bring it to me, make it paste up in block letters so that I can hang it on the ceiling or on the wall so that I have it in front of me every waking moment in my cell. If I can only have one verse of the Bible, this is it. Genesis 15:17. Don't look at it. Let me surprise you. Sit back and enjoy it. You know, feast upon it. This is delicious. And it came about that when the sun had set, that it was very dark. And behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed between these pieces. Can you believe it? In the midst of terror, in the midst of fear and uncertainty, suddenly in his vision of the night, Abraham sees a smoking oven, a flaming torch rise. And this torch that no human being was carrying moved and came near and came to this corridor of carnage of these animals that had been torn asunder. And in that path between the bodies that were mangled on the ground, this flaming torch, this burning oven, moved down the middle of them. So what? Right? Sproul, have you lost your mind? You know, what's the big deal? Here's the big deal. In the ancient world, when truth was at stake, and when a promise was to be made, that was to be absolutely binding, sacrosanct. That promise was made and sealed in the form of a covenant. And in those days, you didn't write a covenant so much as you cut a covenant. Because when the terms of the covenant were made, beloved, and promises were uttered and declared, those promises were not absolutely binding on the persons involved in this agreement until those promises were ratified by a cutting rite. God said to Abraham, Abraham, I will be your God, you will be my people. I will make a covenant with you, and you're going to make the mark of that covenant in your body and in your son's body. I'm going to cut off the foreskin of your flesh so that in your very manhood you will be cut. And the symbol of that cut, the purpose of the knife, will be to remind you that I have cut you off from the rest of this world that is perishing. I have set you apart. I have consecrated you. I have made you holy. And that's the blessing of which I spoke. And the sign of that blessing will be seen in this cutting rite of circumcision. But the sanctions of this covenant, Abraham, are twofold. That sign will also be a sign of the curse to anyone who breaks the terms of this covenant. And the sign of circumcision will mean to you, Abraham, and to your seed forever, that if you ever violate this agreement, that you are saying in your own body, may I be cut off from all of the blessings of God if I fail to obey him. And so every Jew who entered into the covenant with God was forced to go through this liturgy of cutting to ratify the promise. But the point, beloved, is that God did not ask his people to ratify their oath without being willing to do it himself. Now, what happened? How did God swear an oath? Meredith Kline, the Old Testament theologian that's been contributed so much to modern scholarship, once wrote a book called By Oath Consigned, calling attention to the fact that at the heart of our relationship to God is the oath, is the vow, is the promise on both sides of the equation. My promise to God, God's promise to me. Now, how does God swear an oath? How does God make a promise? What does God say? Do we go to God and put a Bible in his hand and say, raise your right hand, God, and say it to me, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me? Huh? We don't do that. How does God take an oath? How does God swear a vow? What we've read here with this strange description of the furnace and the smoke passing through these bloody pieces is a theophany. And a theophany is one of these technical theological terms. You get the Greek word theos for God and phoneo, which means to manifest. The word theophany means a visible manifestation of the invisible God. And when God appears visibly in the Bible, his favorite way of doing it is in some form of fire. The bush that burns but is not consumed. Huh? The pillar of smoke that leads the people of Israel through the wilderness. Do you see, in Hebrew terms, what is happening in this night vision is that Abraham sees that flaming torch moving through those pieces That flaming torch represents the very presence of God. And here God is stooping to human level. God is condescending to swear a sacred, eternal vow to his people. And the meaning of that vow, when God passes between those pieces of the animal, what God is saying to Abraham is, Abraham, do you want to know if I'm going to keep my word? Do you want to know if I'm going to keep my promise to you? Well, let me tell you what I'm going to put on the line. I am swearing by myself. There's nothing higher than myself. I can't swear by the heavens. I made the heavens. I can't swear by the earth. I made the earth. The only thing I can swear by, not the hair of my chinny chin chin, the only thing I can swear by, Abraham, is my eternal character, my immutable being. And what I am dramatizing to you in this action, Abraham, is this. If I ever fail to keep a promise to you, I am saying, may I, the immutable, eternal, self-existent being, suffer a mutation. May I, who am immortal, become mortal. May I, who cannot die, perish. I'm swearing by my deity. And I'm saying that just as you have cut these animals in half, if I ever lie to you, if I ever break a promise to you, may I be cut in half and destroyed. One of the most poignant moments of my ministry was when I was a young teacher at a seminary in Boston and got to know a man in the administration as a dear friend. His name was Deke Ketchum. And Deke got cancer that was terminal, died an inch at a time. And in the last weeks of his life, he was alone in the hospital room in Mass General there in Boston. And I used to go down and visit him at the hospital. I remember I was with him the day he died. And one of the things that bothered me was that there was so little I could do for this man. He was emaciated. He was weak. He could hardly speak. It was a tender thing. I could take the ice from the jar next to his bedside and take little pieces and fragments of ice and put them on his parched lips. And his eyes would speak to me of appreciation. But what Deke wanted more than anything else was for me to read to him from the Scriptures. And on the day he died, here's what I read to him. Turn to the book of Hebrews. And I read this. I said, Deke, here's where the Word of God says, for God is not unjust to forget your work and the love which you have shown toward his name in having ministered and in still ministering to the saints. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence so as to realize the full assurance of hope until the end, that you may not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promise. For when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could swear by none greater, he swore by himself. And then verse 16, for men swear by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath given as confirmation is an end of every dispute. In the same way, God, desiring even more to show the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of the purpose, he interposed it with an oath, in order that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we may have strong encouragement. We who have fled for refuge in laying hold of the hope that is set before us. George Washington could tell a lie. But it's impossible for God to lie. And it is impossible for God to break a promise. For he has taken an oath, and he has sworn by himself.